This is November 21st, 2012. My name is Paul Humber, and I want to share with you about a man named Philip Mauro, but he connects with four interesting things, and I share them here. You can see the picture of Thomas Edison. You can see a ship that sunk during, it was a ship that sunk in the First World War. And until the fall of this year, 2017, I knew essentially nothing about Philip Mauro. But I really like him. We're sort of like kindred spirits. I never met him, of course. And I was reading his book, Evolution at the Bar. And it is my intent to quote from 4 sections of it, very interesting. But first let me share 4 remarkable things about this man. He prepared the winning brief for the William Jennings Bryan at the 1925 Scopes trial. He befriended and witnessed to Thomas A. Edison. He was a passenger on that ship that you see up there, a painting of it, I think, the Carpathia, that actually rescued the passengers of the Titanic, and he was actually a passenger on that Carpathia ship when the rescue took place. And finally, he was a lawyer who practiced before the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, regarding his October 29, 1926 visit with Edison, and he had known Edison from before. He was a patent attorney and all. Edison knew him. He wrote, this is what Mauro wrote, "Mr. Edison is now in his 80th year, but his mind is evidently as keen as ever. All his life, his attitude regarding things not seen, God, the human soul, life hereafter, etc., has been severely skeptical. But now, in the sunset of his days, he has taken the investigation of those great matters with a desire to know the truth, but with insistence upon proof. I want facts," was the way he expressed the attitude of his mind. Owing to Mr. Edison's deafness, it was difficult for the editor, and I think he's referring to himself, to speak to him. But it was better so, and in this sense, the promise was given that he would read attentively a short letter on the matter discussed. So Mauro sent a letter to Mr. Edison, and there is a sort of a heading of one of his letters. I'm not saying it was the very letter that he used or whatever. So on the next day, he wrote a letter to Mr. Edison, and it's a very interesting letter. It was not too long. "It was a real pleasure to see you," he wrote, "and hear your voice again. Moreover, the matters touched upon in our conversation of yesterday gave me much to think about. You want facts, so do I. A reasonable man's belief should rest upon nothing less substantial than well-attested facts. So here is a fact for you. God, whom you reverently call the Supreme Intelligence, loves you and wants your love in return. My visit to you and this letter are evidence of it, though, of course, not sufficient to prove to your satisfaction either that God is or that he cares for Thomas Edison. But wait. Another fact. God is light. How do I know? I know only in the way that light can be known, by experience. For the nature of light is such that it admits of being known only in the way of experiential knowledge. I am saying this to the man who has had more to do with the development of artificial light than any other who ever lived in this dark world, and who probably knows more about light in a practical way than any other. How then could the existence and the nature of light be demonstrated to one who had been shut up all his life in a dark cell? It could be done only in some way, such as by opening a window, and then the light would enter and prove itself. And he refers to this Butler's analogy here in the letter, so I put a front cover of it. I'm continuing quoting Mauro to Edison. This I say because you are seeking a solution of the mystery of life and the soul by the way of analogies from nature. Very good. Much truth can be got in that way, as Butler in his famous analogy has abundantly shown. I hope you will continue your investigation and in your customary thoroughgoing fashion, for it is the most important you ever undertook. And in this connection I call your attention to a clear and pertinent analogy, the point of which is that the proof you demand can be had only by experiment. For myself, I know that God is light, and that he sheds light in the heart that is opened to him, because I put the matter to the test of experience 23 years ago, and have enjoyed the consciousness of spiritual light ever since. Moreover, my experience is that of millions of others. Let me remind you that light will not force its way into a place that is tightly closed, but that, if only a tiny chink be opened, in it comes proving itself. Likewise, Christ, who is the true light, does not force himself into the chambers of the soul against the human will. For the nature of the matter is such that, like the smell of a violet, the color of a sunset, or the taste of honey, it can only be known by experiment. The good book that you ask me not to quote says, "Come and see, taste and see." Is not that strictly scientific? And I add here that the Apostle Paul, of course, when he was converted, the Lord appeared to him in a great light, but Mauro doesn't refer to that, I don't think, in the letter. And here are 3 pictures of Philip Mauro. He's continuing in the letter, and he's concluding here. You have been truly doing God's work in helping to enlighten the darkness of nature. But there is a spiritual darkness too. So follow the analogy, and it will lead you straight to the truth and to the solution of the whole mystery of human existence. With sincere affection and respect, signed, Philip Mauro. Now I'm going to quote from this book by Mauro. It was in Dad's library. There's what was on the inside cover. My dad is Charles M. Humber. And there's a picture of him maybe when he got the book. He was about 18 in that picture. On page 38 of the book, Mauro offers a definition of evolution. Evolution undertakes to account for every part of every living organism by progressive modifications caused by resident forces, not external forces, but resident forces. And I add here, in other words, evolution attempts to understand everything apart from God. In short, evolutionism in general is atheism. But then he talks about the water spider, or the diving bell spider. It's on page 44, 45, and it's very interesting. So I quote, upon examining the water spider and acquainting ourselves with its ways, we find that its body is covered with hairs in such a way that it does not become wet when in contact with water. In order to live underwater and rear its young there, it must construct a waterproof cell capable of containing enough air for breathing purposes. It must have it must have means for renewing the supply of air from time to time, and it must have the instincts to guide it in the performance of these necessary operations. And we may confidently add that the very first water spider must have been fully equipped for the purposes indicated. It spins under the water an egg-shaped envelope, open underneath for entrance and egress. This envelope, which is waterproof, is securely attached to some object so that it will remain submerged. Having constructed its house, the little creature next proceeds to fill it with air. For this necessary operation, its hind legs are covered with hair and are so constructed that they can take hold of a large bubble of air and carry it down into the water and to the opening of its house. There the air is released and it rises to the top of the envelope, expelling the corresponding quantity of water. This operation is repeated until the cell is sufficiently filled with air. The eggs are then laid in the upper part of this house and are surrounded by a cocoon. It is manifest that this extraordinary manner of life and the highly specialized organs which are vital to it could not possibly be the outcome of a long and slow process of development. Before the life of a water spider could even begin, it must be equipped with first the means for secreting a waterproof material, second, means for spinning that material into a watertight cell, third, protective hairs to keep it from becoming wet, fourth, the peculiar apparatus for filling its house with air, fifth, the several instincts which prompt the doing of these remarkable things. That there is no trace of the evolution of the water spider or of any other creature is reasonable enough why the theory should be rejected. But we confidently submit that the facts briefly set forth above and the conclusions which necessarily follow from them constitute proof positive that evolution is not only an impossibility but an absurdity. On page 51, he takes a different tack. He talks about the difference between men, or man, and beast. Quote, "The differences immeasurably great between the brute and the man lie beneath the surface, and have their existence in the regions of the soul and spirit, regions which, though so manifestly real, are yet so mysterious that even man himself has no means to explore them, nor words to describe the simplest of their mysteries. In man we find a creature who is self-conscious, who can reflect, reason, contemplate, who has the power of abstraction, who can comprehend general ideas, who can arrange his thoughts, who can communicate them to others by oral and written language, who has a sense of beauty, ability to enjoy harmonies of sound or color, a perception of right and wrong, a conscience, and above all, who has the capacity to know God. How vast are the differences." He talks about Herbert Spencer on page 60. Mr. Spencer dogmatically asserts that, quote, "the deepest, widest, and most certain of all facts," end of quote, is this, namely, that the power which the universe manifests to us is utterly inscrutable. This is, for all practical purposes, pure atheism. And I'm quoting Mauro here. It asserts that there is no revelation from God, and can be none. It is, however, an assertion of the most reckless sort, which has absolutely nothing to back it up except Mr. Spencer's spiritual blindness and deadness. Continuing, it has no more weight or authority than would attach to the assertion of a blind man that the deepest, widest, and most certain of all facts is that total darkness is the universal and perpetual state of nature. That a man may be in complete ignorance of God is evident enough, but that one should make his own ignorance the ground of denying the possibility of knowing God is simply to add colossal presumption to total ignorance. Now, I have a little problem with his statement that a man may be in complete ignorance of God is evident enough, because God's Word says that there is a sense in which everyone knows God. Let me quote from Romans 1. That which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks. Now it is, of course, true that there is ugliness and death in the world. But the Lord has the solution for that problem in his Son's death and resurrection. Ask him to save you from rebellion. Then trust him fully. Now, I didn't say much about Carpathia, and I think this may be the last slide. There's a picture of the ship that actually rescued the Titanic passengers. It itself went down hit by a German U-boat during World War I. And as you look at that picture of that boat sinking, Christians who want to obey Christ should sink into the waters of baptism, signifying identification with the Lord Jesus in his death and burial. In other words, when Jesus died, we were by faith dying, and he was buried for us, and so on. They are also raised out of the waters of baptism, signifying hope in the resurrection Jesus will bring. And you can read about that in Romans 6.